My father stood on my doorstep after 3 years of silence and handed me a package that he claimed was a final insult from the grave. But he had no idea he was delivering his own destruction. My name is Faith, and I recently turned 30. On the exact day of that milestone, my life was appended by a visit I never expected. My father, a man who had treated me like a ghost for years, suddenly appeared at my apartment. He hadn't seen where I lived in 3 years. He didn't care to. But there he was, holding a weathered envelope, looking at me with that familiar mix of pity and disdain. He told me that my grandmother had left this for me, that she had died ashamed of the person I had become. He said she believed I was a failure. Those words cut deep, intended to sever the last emotional tether I had to the only woman who had ever truly loved me. But he was wrong. Inside that envelope wasn't a rejection. It was a letter that started with a sentence that stopped my heart. If you are reading this letter, my darling, it means you have successfully outlasted your parents. Along with that letter was a key, a small physical object that unlocked a 5-year-old secret. What I discovered next didn't just change my financial situation. It rewrote the entire history of my family, exposed a criminal betrayal, and proved that my grandmother had been playing a much longer game than anyone realized. Before I dive into the details of that discovery, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy stories about justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And subscribe if you haven't already now to truly understand the weight of that key. We have to go back 5 years to the day we buried Eleanor Mercer. The chapel was suffocating, filled with the heavy scent of overpriced floral arrangements and the hushed murmurs of the local elite. My grandmother, Eleanor, rested in a casket that cost more than my annual salary, surrounded by white blooms that looked more like a curated exhibit than a tribute. In the background, a string quartet droned on, playing music that felt devoid of any real emotion. My father, Richard, held court in the center of the room. He wasn't mourning. He was managing. He shook hands, nodded solemnly, and accepted sympathies with the practiced grace of a politician. The light from the chandeliers caught the gold of his watch every time he moved. He thanked people for coming, telling them how much Mother would have appreciated their presence. I stood in the periphery, blending into the wallpaper. Victoria, my stepmother, glided through the mourners in a designer black dress, performing the role of the grieving daughter-in-law to perfection. She paraded my half-brother Derek around the room. He was 19 then, fresh from his first year at an Ivy League university, and Victoria introduced him to everyone as Eleanor's pride and joy. "This is Derek," she'd say, her beloved grandson. No one mentioned me. I was 25, a third-grade teacher working in a district that most of these people wouldn't drive through, let alone work in. To them, I was the family failure, the girl who settled for a humble job instead of chasing a high-powered career. But as I stood there by the flower arrangements, I wasn't thinking about their judgment. I was remembering the woman who used to call me her little star. Grandma Eleanor had taught me to read before I started school. She had taken me in for 2 years after my mother passed away, giving me the only stability I had ever known. She wrote me letters constantly, even after I became an adult, on her special cream-colored stationery. I had no idea then that those letters were pieces of a puzzle she was slowly assembling. I just knew she was gone, and I was the only one in that room who seemed to be feeling the loss rather than calculating the inheritance to get why this matters. You have to know where I came from. My mom, Linda, died when I was 12. I still have nightmares about the hospital, the sterile beeping of monitors, and the feeling of her hand going limp in mine. My father had stood by the window that day, looking out at the parking lot already, mentally checking out. He didn't know how to be a father to a grieving girl. 2 weeks after Mom's funeral, he drove me to Vermont. to Grandma Eleanor's sprawling colonial house and left me there. He said he needed time to process. That time stretched into 2 years, but those years with Grandma were a gift. She made breakfast fun, reading stories to me with different voices for every character. She told me about my mother's childhood, sharing memories my father had buried. Your mother was a warrior, she told me once as she tucked me in. And you have that same fire faith, never forget that. When I turned 14, my father remarried. Victoria was sleek, younger, and ambitious. She insisted I move back in with them to form a real family. So I was uprooted again, moved into a suburban mansion where my bedroom was the smallest one, isolated near the garage. A year later, Derek was born, and I effectively ceased to exist. I didn't realize it at the time, but my grandmother was watching. All of this. She saw how I was pushed aside. She saw her son's vanity and his wife's ambition. By the time I graduated college with my teaching degree, my father had stopped feigning interest in my life. He skipped my graduation for a client meeting. "You understand, don't you?" he had asked. I understood perfectly. When Derek got into university, however, they threw a gala. 50 guests, catered dinner, champagne. My father gave a speech about the Mercer legacy. I sat at a back table, sipping wine I couldn't afford to buy myself. Watching them celebrate the golden child, every holiday followed the same script. My father would eventually ask, "Still teaching, Faith?" "Yes, Dad." "And what does that pay?" 30 grand? 40? He'd chuckle, a dismissive sound. I give Derek that much just for spending money. He wasn't joking. Derek drove a luxury car paid for by our father. I drove a beaten-up sedan I bought with my own savings. Daughters, my father once declared at a Thanksgiving dinner, lack the biological drive for empire building. They think too small. It's all feelings and family with them. Fine for keeping a home, but useless for business. Victoria would pat my hand with fake sympathy. "Faith is a nurturer," she'd coo. "That's her talent." My talent was shaping young minds and surviving on a teacher's salary while my father bought yachts. I never fought back. I learned early on that challenging Richard Mercer was a losing battle. So I stayed quiet. I stayed small. And tragically, I believed my grandmother had eventually bought into their narrative. 2 weeks after her funeral, the will was read. We gathered in a somber law office downtown. My father sat at the head of the table, radiating authority. "Victoria." And Derek flanked him. I took a seat near the exit. The attorney was a young man I didn't know, and he looked nervous. He kept glancing at my father. He read through the standard legalese, charities, minor bequests, until he got to the family distribution. "To my son, Richard Mercer, I leave 90% of my estate to be managed and distributed at his sole discretion." My father nodded. Looking bored, he expected this. "To my granddaughter, Faith Mercer, I leave the sum of $10,000, intended for the purchase of a reliable vehicle." $10,000. That was it. Victoria squeezed my hand. "How thoughtful," she whispered. "She wanted to make sure you were safe on the road." I nodded, throat tight. Derek didn't even look at me. He was already asking Dad about investment options. My father smiled, a look of deep satisfaction. "Mother always was a distinct judge of character," he said. "She knew what everyone deserved." I signed the papers. I walked out of there believing that my grandmother, my little star, had looked at my life and decided I wasn't worth more than a used car. He had hesitated before reading the section about me. I brushed it off. Then I shouldn't have. 5 years went by. I continued teaching, moving into a tiny studio apartment that I could pay for myself. I stopped attending most family events, and they rarely invited me. Then came my 30th birthday. I was celebrating alone with a cupcake and a single candle. When my doorbell rang, it was my father. He hadn't visited in 3 years. He stood there in a cashmere coat that cost more than my rent, holding a yellowed envelope. "Found this in Mother's old papers," he said, skipping a greeting. "Must have been misplaced. Thought you should have it." He shoved it toward me. "Don't get excited," he sneered. "She wrote it years ago, probably just sentimental drivel." He paused, turning to leave. "She died thinking you were a disappointment, you know. She told me herself. Sad she was worried you'd never amount to anything." He left me standing there, the cold air rushing in. I stared at the envelope. It was sealed with my grandmother's wax stamp, her initials pressed into the red wax. The seal was unbroken. My father hadn't opened it. I sat down and broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter wrapped around a small brass key. "My dearest Faith," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you have successfully outlasted your parents. I knew you would." My hands trembled. Parents, plural. She knew exactly what I was up against. My sweet girl, listen to me. I have never not, for a single second, believed you were anything less than magnificent. If your father told you otherwise, he is lying. It is a trait he inherited, unfortunately. Tears blurred my vision. 5 years of carrying the weight of her supposed disappointment, and it was all a lie. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at the downtown branch of First National Bank, Box 1247. You are the only authorized person. Not your father, not his wife, just you. Inside, you will find the truth. The documents, the proof, and your actual inheritance. Not the crumbs Richard decided to give you. I reread that line. Your actual inheritance? I didn't leave these. With the family lawyer, she wrote. Richard would have destroyed them. I hid them where only you could get them. But there's also a contact card from Margaret Holloway. She knows everything. Call her. And remember, you are not who they say you are. The key felt heavy in my hand. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I called in sick, something I never did, and drove to the bank. First National was an imposing building, all marble and silence. I walked up to the teller with my ID and the key. I need to access box 1247, I said. The clerk typed in the number, paused, and then looked at me with wide eyes. Please wait 1 moment, ma'am. 10 minutes later, I was in the branch manager's office. Thomas Caldwell was a kind man with graying hair. He looked at his computer screen and then at me. Miss Mercer, he said. This box was established by Eleanor Mercer in 2019. You were listed as the sole beneficiary. We have had ... attempts by others to access it, but we followed your grandmother's instructions to the letter. Attempts? I asked, by who? I cannot disclose that, he said diplomatically. But Mrs. Mercer was clear. She told me, when my granddaughter comes, and she will come, tell her I never stopped believing in her. I choked back a sob. Mr. Caldwell stood up. Let's go to the vault. He left me alone in the small private room with the box. It was larger than I expected. Inside, I found a thick folder, a leather portfolio, and another envelope. I opened the folder first. The document on top stopped my breath. Last will and testament of Eleanor Grace Mercer, dated March 15th, 2019, 2 years after. The will my father had read. I scanned the pages until I found my name, valued at approximate $1.8 million, and my property in Stowe, Vermont, valued at $1 million. $2.8 million, and the house, the only place I'd ever felt safe. My father had told me it was sold to pay debts. I kept reading. To my son, Richard Mercer, I leave the sum of $50,000 in the hope that he learns family is not a business transaction. $50,000. A fraction of the estate. Asterisk. The will was legally perfect, signed, witnessed, notarized, but there was more. Bank statements, trust fund records. and transfer logs showing massive withdrawals. I laid the papers out. The pattern was obvious. September 2022, $85,000 withdrawn. September 2023, $82,000 withdrawn. May 2024, $150,000 withdrawn to Mercer Properties, LLC. Money legally left to me to pay for his golden child's education and his own. Business failings. And he had done it while telling me I was worthless. The shock faded, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. Derek's degree, his car, my father's lifestyle, it was all funded by my inheritance. At the bottom of the box was a note. Faith, you are likely angry right now. Good, use it. You are not broken. I didn't leave you defenseless. Call Margaret. The truth always comes out. Sometimes it just needs a push. I gathered the evidence and walked out of that bank a different person. The Faith who walked in was a victim. The Faith who walked out was a prosecutor. I called Margaret Holloway immediately. Miss Mercer, she answered, as if she'd been sitting by the phone for 5 years. I've been waiting for this call. Margaret was a sharp, silver-haired attorney, operating out of a discreet brownstone. She was my grandmother's personal friend and secret legal counsel. I handled her real assets, she explained, pouring me tea. Richard used the family firm, but Eleanor didn't trust him. I wrote the 2019 will. I witnessed it. She looked me in the eye. Your father probated the 2015 will. That is fraud, Faith. Felony fraud. What can we do? I asked. We could go to the police, Margaret said. He'd face prison time. Or we can confront him and force a settlement. Full restoration of assets plus penalties. He avoids jail. You get your life back. Would he agree? Richard Mercer would do anything to save face, she replied. The question is, do you want a quiet victory, or do you want him to feel it? I thought about the years of insults. The way he made me feel small. The way he used my mother's memory against me. I don't need to destroy him, I said. But I want him to admit it publicly, in front of the people he tries so hard to impress. Margaret smiled. Well, isn't it lucky his birthday is coming up? The invitation had arrived a week prior. A gold embossed card inviting me to celebrate Richard Mercer's 65th year. It was being held at his country club, 80 guests. Judges, CEOs, the social elite. You want to serve him with papers at his party? Margaret asked, eyes twinkling. I want to give him the gift of truth, I said. Margaret pulled out her calendar. 3 weeks. Let's get to work. The week before the party, my father texted me, come over, family meeting. I went. Victoria let me in, stone-faced. My father sat behind his desk, Derek looking awkward in the corner. I heard you were asking questions at the bank, my father said, voice dripping with ice, about mother's accounts. I was just curious, I said, keeping my face blank. Let me be clear, he threatened. The estate is settled. If you start digging up old history, people will think you're unstable, like your mother. He went on, implying that my teaching job would be at risk if rumors of mental instability got out. I stood up. Thanks for the concern, Dad. See you at the party. I walked out, shaking, but I wasn't helpless. I had recorded the entire conversation on my phone. I sent the file to Margaret. Insurance, she texted back. The night before the party, I panicked. What if I was wrong? What if the documents were fake? I called Margaret at midnight. Faith, she said gently. Eleanor called me days before she died. She told me, Richard is going to try to steal everything from Faith. Promise me you'll help her when she finds the key. I promised. You aren't wrong. You're ready. The day of the party, I dressed in navy blue and wore my grandmother's pearls. I carried a leather folder containing certified copies of the 2019 will, the bank logs, and the deed to the Vermont house. Margaret was coming too, bringing the notary and the witnesses as her guests. The country club was lavish, crystal, jazz, champagne. My father was in his element, holding court. I built this life from nothing, I heard him boast to a group of investors. Just hard work and grit, Victoria spotted me. Try to look happy. Faith, she hissed, and don't embarrass us. I'll do my best, I said. When the time came for the speeches, my father took the mic. He talked about his success, his vision, and his legacy. He pointed to Derek, my son, the future of Mercer Properties. A young man my mother would have been so proud of. Applause filled the room. And my daughter Faith, he added, almost as an afterthought, who has chosen the quieter path. More polite clapping. To Eleanor Mercer, he toasted, whose values I uphold every day. I stood up. Dad, I projected my voice. Can I say a few words about Grandma? The room went silent. He stared at me, trapped. He couldn't say no in front of his guests. Of course, he said stiffly. Family first. I walked to the front, my heart hammering, but my hands steady. I took the mic. Happy birthday, Dad, I said. Grandma Eleanor was the most important person in my life. She taught me kindness. She taught me to read. And I unzipped my bag. She taught me to keep receipts. My father's smile faltered. I recently found some documents Grandma left for me. I continued, pulling out the folder, including her last will and testament from March 2019, fully notarized. I held it up. According to this valid legal document, I inherited $2.8 million in the Vermont estate. Not the used car money I was told I received. Gasps rippled through the room. Faith, stop. My father stepped forward, his face pale. This isn't the place. It's the perfect place, I said calmly. This will prove that the 2015 will you submitted to probate, the one that gave you everything, was superseded. In the legal world, submitting an invalid will is called fraud. Wise, he snapped. She was confused. She didn't know what she was signing. Actually, she did. Margaret Holloway stood up from the back table. I'm Margaret Holloway, Eleanor's attorney. I drafted this will. I witnessed it. She was sharp as a tack. The room swiveled to look at her, and the notary is sitting right here. Margaret pointed to the woman beside her. She can testify too. My father looked like a trapped animal. I also have bank records, I said, lifting the next stack of papers, showing over $300,000 withdrawn from my trust fund to pay for Derek's tuition and Mercer. Properties, debts. Derek stood up, looking horrified. Dad, is that true? There was family money. My father yelled, losing control. I managed it. I decided how it was spent. It was my money, I corrected, left to me, and you stole it. Judge Morrison, a guest at table 4, stood up. Richard, if these documents are real, you're admitting to executive fraud and embezzlement. That's a felony. The party was effectively over. The silence was deafening. I'm not here to arrest. You, Dad, I said into the quiet. I just want what is mine. Return the assets. Transfer the property. Repay the stolen funds. Do that, and we settle this privately. And if not, someone whispered. Then we file charges on Monday, Margaret answered. My father looked around the room. He saw the judgment in his friend's eyes. He saw the disgust. His reputation, the thing he valued more than his own child, was incinerated. You planned this, he hissed at me. You ungrateful. You have 5 years to tell the truth, I said. You chose this. I handed the folder to Margaret and walked out. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt laid out in the weeks that followed. My father's lawyer quickly arranged the settlement. I got everything back, the trust, the house, and restitution for the stolen funds. My father was forced to step down as executor. His business took a massive hit as partners fled. Victoria divorced him 6 months later. Derek reached out to me. We met for coffee. He looked shaken. I didn't know, he said. I thought the money came from Dad's business. I'm paying my own way now, taking out loans. I believed him. He was a product of their manipulation, too. Prove you're different, I told him. That's all you can do. I'm still teaching. People ask why I kept my job now that I'm a millionaire. I tell them that money buys security, but it doesn't buy purpose. I love my students. I love seeing them learn. But now, I set up a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name to help kids who need a break. I spend my summers at the Vermont house, sitting on the porch where Grandma used to read to me. I don't talk to my father. He's not a villain in my life anymore. He's just a stranger. I learned that boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about protection. And I learned that the people who really love you never make you earn it. Grandma Eleanor signed her letter. All my love, always. For a long time, I doubted that love. Now, I know it was the only real thing in that house, if you've ever felt invisible, or if someone made you feel like you weren't enough. Remember this story. You are not who they say you are. You are the author of your own life, and that is how I survived my parents. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. I'm Faith, and thanks for listening to Tales by Granny.